Today we're going to be talking about cost-benefit analysis. And if you've ever made a pros or cons list, you've done some level of cost-benefit analysis. As policy analysts, we want to do a more sophisticated version of cost-benefit analysis, but at its most simple form, all we're doing is quantifying those same types of pros and cons lists that you have made in your life prior to this. We're going to do it in a more rigorous way, but the concepts are generally the same. To do a cost-benefit analysis, you're going to follow a certain set of steps. You want to define the goal or the goals of your project. So you need to have a clear outcome that you're working toward, whether that's to implement a new benefit, whether it's to build a new facility in a community, whatever it might be, you need to clearly define what the outcome is going to be. And then you need to identify alternatives. So what if you didn't do that? Is there a different location you could use? Could it be larger, smaller? Any of these types of options you'll develop through a policy analysis. And once you've created options, for each of those options, you need to make an exhaustive list of the benefits and the costs of doing each of them. Once you have your exhaustive list, you're going to estimate the monetary value of those costs and benefits. And generally, the thing people are most focused on is what can be monetized or quantified in some sort of dollar amount. But there are going to be other costs and benefits that it's really difficult to monetize, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Once you've done that, if needed, you can project those into the future. In one of our earlier videos, we talked about simple projections into the future, so you have some idea of how you might do that. And then you choose the option that's going to have the largest benefit with the smallest cost. Your goal is always going to be to maximize the benefit while minimizing the cost for the policy option you're going to recommend. You wouldn't want to select an option that's going to cost more to come to the same outcome, if there's an alternative that does the same for less. Optimization is always going to be key in doing these cost-benefit analysis and selecting the policy recommendation that you want to put forward. Cost-benefit analysis, most people are focusing on estimating the monetary value of the cost and benefits, and that's a really important step. And so it should receive attention, but there's a step that's often skipped or sort of not taken as seriously, which is making an exhaustive list of all the benefits and the costs. If you don't have an exhaustive list, you might overlook something that's actually quite a large cost that you're not taking into account when choosing your options. And so you want to take that step in this process really seriously and be thorough in what you're considering a cost and what you're considering a benefit, both the direct costs, but also indirect costs and externalities that might be more difficult to identify for your project. And that takes time and patience, but makes your overall cost-benefit analysis much better. So when we think about costs, there's several different kinds of costs, as I mentioned previously. There are going to be direct costs, and these are the easy things. Does it cost money to do the thing that you want to do? If you're providing a new benefit, how much money does it cost for each individual person who will receive the benefit? If you want to establish a new facility, how much will construction cost? How much will the actual physical structure be, contracts that you'll need to get that done? Then there are indirect costs. That's things like costs to an institution or the government to run a benefits program. So you need staff who are actually going to process those benefits. They're going to need to sit in office space. These are some of the overhead costs that organizations might have, are an easy example of indirect costs that will need to be taken into consideration. Then there are intangible costs. These can be important, but are often not focused on because they're difficult to monetize. And the biggest takeaway from a cost-benefit analysis is which option costs more. And that's looking at dollars and cents, where these intangibles can often be something like a detriment to a community. There might be a cohesiveness to the community that's lost because of the type of facility you built there or where you built it. There might be a loss of satisfaction for individuals who are using a benefit program if you change it in a certain way. Those intangibles are difficult to monetize. It's difficult to say, well, this person's lack of satisfaction is equivalent to losing $4. That's not easy to do, but they can still be important and should be outlined in your cost-benefit analysis, even if you can't monetize them. And then there's externalities. And so externalities are going to be side effects or unforeseen consequences. They can be positive or negative, things that flow to a group that's not intended. So if, for example, you're providing a benefit, we'll say a monetary benefit to a group of people that you want to raise their incomes above the poverty threshold. If you're providing them income, some of the externalities could be that they now have more purchasing power. And with that purchasing power, they are now frequenting additional merchants in their area. And so that's improving the ability of those merchants to stay in business, to offer new products, and it provides a benefit to them. That's an externality of the benefit program you put into place. It's not what you intended to do, and it wasn't supposed to be a support for businesses, but providing a benefit to individuals that will shop at those businesses creates a positive externality that you might want to take into account when you're doing your cost-benefit analysis. And that leads us to benefits. Similar to costs, you're going to want to try to monetize these, turn them into dollars and cents, so that you can compare them easily with a cost associated with any given policy option. It's going to be the value of all the consequences of a policy. We often think about the value to taxpayers, so how much money will it cost the taxpayer, but what benefit will they receive? So some number of people, if you're doing a monetary benefit, it's very easy to see the benefit to those individuals. They will now have a higher income than they did before because of your intervention. But it can also be to other members of society. What sort of positive benefits might come to sort of the poorest members of society that are receiving this benefit? What does it mean for their children, for example, and their earning potential if they're not worried about food insecurity or housing insecurity? And how does that play out in the purchasing power that they'll have in the future? It can also be applied to policies, programs, demonstrations, regulations, any of these things that you want to implement. You're going to assume that they have a benefit. Otherwise, why would you be doing it in the first place? And so you want to try to monetize those as much as possible, but similar to costs, there's going to be some that are difficult to monetize. You're going to be looking at, for example, the value of change behavior. And so you can say that a certain outcome in someone's behavior is better than another, but it might be difficult to monetize. Some things could be easy. For example, lowering the number of trips someone takes to the emergency room. Their behavior is to, instead of going to the emergency room, going to their primary care provider. And that's a change in behavior, but it also is associated with the benefit of reduced costs because care you receive from a primary care provider is less expensive than care you receive from the emergency room. So you've changed the behavior, and it creates a benefit or a cost reduction. There's also the cost avoidance of negative outcomes. And so in the same example for healthcare, if you are avoiding the extra cost it takes if someone waits a really long time and then shows up to the emergency room with a condition that is worse than it would have been if they had easy access to a primary care provider who might have identified a problem, a disease earlier on, where it didn't take as much money or resources to treat or cure that individual, then you're also avoiding the negative consequence by creating an intervention that gets them to that primary care provider earlier. You're avoiding the cost of more intensive treatment that they may have needed if their disease was not identified early on. And so for each of those things, you want to create a value, similar to how you're monetizing the costs. You want to monetize each of those benefits for the program that you want to recommend. We talked about intangible benefits around costs, and that same thing is true for benefits. So that same person who's now healthier, there's the intangible benefit of how much happier they might be, how much easier it is for them to interact in their community and participate when they're not dealing with some sort of illness or disease that's going untreated and leaving them less able to do any of those things, or is leading to things like depression. And so those are intangible benefits that it can be difficult to monetize, but can still be really important, and so you at least want to call out. Some of these impacts may be uncertain. You may not know how exactly your program is going to play out, or the trial that you're doing, what the effects will be. So you want to list what you expect, test, see what happens over a certain period of time once you've made the recommendation, and then continue to come back to your cost-benefit analysis and make changes and updates based on what you see happening in the real world. Again, benefits, you're going to want to look at both the type of the benefit and the size of the benefit, as well as the effectiveness. So in general, when we're talking about prevention programs, for example, someone going to a primary care provider instead of the emergency room, if you have an intervention to promote that behavior change that you want to to recommend and have take place, not everyone is going to go to that primary care provider. There are still going to be people, regardless of your intervention, that still go to the emergency room, whether that's the best place for them to receive treatment or not. And so you want to take into account the fact that any of your benefits are not going to accrue to 100% of the people that you would like them to. And so here you can see an equation that talks about how to handle that. And so you want to say that we have the amount of the benefit, you multiply that by the percent of the effectiveness, and that may just be an assumption that you're making. For example, that there's going to be 10% of people that you cannot get to change their behavior. It's not possible based on your intervention. And at first you may have to make an assumption about that, and then revisit it once you see how many people are actually taking up a primary care provider instead of going to the emergency room. What percent of people are actually doing that? Then you can revisit your cost-benefit analysis. Maybe the benefits are larger than you thought. Maybe instead of having 10% not take up this behavior change, you only have 5%, and you're having more benefits. Or maybe there's 25% of people that for whatever reason don't want to go to their primary care provider and go to the emergency room instead. You need to have that information to be able to make this an effective calculation. That'll give you a better sense of a realistic level of benefit. If you're assuming everyone is going to receive the full benefit from whatever it is you want to do, that's probably not realistic, and you want to be as realistic as possible so that people take your estimates seriously. And so when you get to the point that you're comparing costs and benefits, you want to look at the overall costs and benefits. You're going to be subtracting the amount of costs from the benefits. You can see here it's a very simple equation, but you have your overall cost-benefit analysis. It's going to be the monetized value of your benefits and then subtract the monetized value of the costs. And here you're not going to be able to get into the intangibles, but you can do both the direct and the indirect benefits and the direct and the indirect costs. You'll have a monetized value for those and subtract one from the other to see how much either savings there's going to be or how much cost you have to accept in order to have the intervention that you want to recommend. And you can also turn that into a ratio. So you can also say that if you're dividing your benefits by the costs, it'll tell you whether your benefits exceed your costs or if they don't. And so you can also communicate your cost-benefit analysis as a ratio. When you're actually getting to the point of expressing your cost-benefit analysis to someone who's interested in knowing what was the result of your analysis, you're going to want to ensure that you include all of the information we talked about. You're going to want to know that final number, the difference between the benefits and the costs, but you're also going to want to explain, and this will just be in writing, sort of in details, in addition to your cost-benefit analysis, that number that everyone's going to look to, the sort of intangible things, the things that might be qualitative and not monetized, but can also be important to give someone a full picture to make a really informed decision based on your cost-benefit analysis. You want to be thorough and include all of the different things in that exhaustive list that you considered when you were looking at the different options available.